Alright guys, will Jews become a minority in Israel? I'm going to break down the numbers between Jews and non-Jews in a few minutes. But first I want to do an overview of the population as a whole. And the current population of Israel is about 8.9 million. And as we can see in this graph, the population has increased rapidly since its foundation in 1948. And this trend is expected to continue up until at least the end of this century. And it's estimated that by the end of this century, the population will be just over 18 million. So just over double what it is now. And Israel is considered a developed country. And pretty much it's the only developed country that has a graph like this where the population is expected to grow like this. If you look at most other developed countries, their populations are expected to decline over the next 80 years. So Israel is projected to have a really healthy population growth over the remainder of this century. And if we look here at the growth rate, it was over 5% back in the 50s, huge growth, and the growth rate has decreased, but right now its growth rate is a very healthy 1.55%. Since the establishment of the state, the population has increased approximately tenfold, primarily as a result of the high immigration of Jews into the country. So Israel, as you probably know, it's set up as a Jewish state, and they have allowed millions of Jews immigrate into Israel over the last 70 years since the foundation of the state. And that means that Jews are a pretty high majority of the population. But as we're going to see in a minute, that majority is going down. Now, in the last 8 years or so, the Jewish population grew by 1.8%, a similar trend observed in the previous years. Now look at this, the Arab growth rate was 2.4%, down tremendously from the 3.4% annual growth rate experienced in the 1990s. So as we can see, in the last 8 years, the Arab growth rate is actually higher than the Jewish growth rate. So it's 2.4% compared to 1.8%. And back in the 1990s, the Arab growth rate was even higher. It was 3.4%. So almost double the Jewish population growth rate. So this is what I mean by the Jewish majority decreasing, and we're going to look at the numbers later on that. The Christian population grew by 1.3% and the Druze population grew by 1.7%. So Christianity and the Druze religion, these are minority religions in Israel. Here's a look at the growth rate in the past. The current rate is about 1.6, maybe slightly less than that. And as we can see, back in the 1950s, it was over 6%, huge growth there, and the growth rate has decreased. But as I said, this is still a good steady growth rate, 1.6%. That's still a pretty good rate, and if you compare that to other countries where the populations are already decreasing, the future in terms of Israel's overall population is looking really good. And here is the future projections, and it's expected to grow all the way till the end of the century. Now the growth rate is expected to decline steadily, but still having it in the green here is still really good. And by the end of the century, it's expected to grow at about 0.5% a year. And here is Israel's population pyramid. And this is a pretty healthy pyramid. You can see it expanding continuously as we go down in age. Over the coming 40, 50 years, we're going to have lots and lots of young people able to work and pay for the healthcare and the social welfare of all the old people, like it is right now. So this is a very healthy pyramid, and it's looking at the numbers. This pyramid is not going to change much over the next 40, 50 years because the population is still going to increase at a steady rate. So this is what I really want to get into in this video. In 2013, 75% of the population was Jewish, while Arabs accounted for 21% of the population. So 3/4 of Israel is Jewish, at least it was back in 2013, and the remaining 4% of the population, 318,000 referred to as others, are members of Jewish immigrants not yet registered by the ministry as Jews, non-Arabs, Christians, or non-Arab Muslims with no religious or ethnic background. So as we can see, Jews account for 3/4, the vast majority, and Arabs 21%. So 1 in 5 are Arabs, or just over 1 in 5. Israel has a law of return which grants all Jews and people of Jewish descent the right to citizenship. If you're Jewish, you can be an Israeli citizen and you can move to Israel. And this has resulted in massive immigration to Israel. Jews from all over the world have immigrated to Israel, and this is a huge part of the reason why the population of Israel has increased rapidly in the last 70 years. But we also have lots of Arabs and non-Jews adding to the population of Israel. Also, in the last 10 years, you have migrant workers from Africa, China, Romania, and South America. So it's estimated that there's over 200,000 migrants, including about 60,000 from Africa. When Israel was established in 1948, it only had 806,000 people, and now it's more than 10 times that figure. It's almost 9 million. So look at this. In early 1994, Israel had a population of approximately 5.3 million people. Of this, 81.5% were Jewish. So look at this figure here. 81.5% were Jewish in 1994. And if we go back up here in 2013, it was 75%. So this is what I mean when I say that the majority of the population being Jewish is actually decreasing. It went from over 81% to 75% between 1994 and 2013. So let's have a look at these figures, because these are the important figures I want to point your attention to. In 1950, 87.8% of Israel were Jewish. 87.8%. 7 out of every 8 people roughly was Jewish. And look at how this percentage has gone down over the years. Now, it did increase to over 88%, almost 89% in 1960. But since then, it's been dropping. So in 1970, it was down to 85%. In 1990, it was just under 82%. And then in 2000, it was 77.8%. And then in 2014, it had dropped just below 75%, 74.96%. And as we can see, it has kind of leveled off. And in 2019, it had dropped down a little bit more to 74.24%. So since 1950, it's gone down from almost 88% to 74%. And if we look at the percentage of Muslims, in 1950 it was 8.47%, and now it's 17.8%. So it's more than doubled. The percentage of the population that are Muslims has more than doubled since 1950. So will Jews become a minority in Israel? And I think the answer depends on how much more Jewish immigration to Israel is there going to be in the next 80 years. And if we look at the Jewish population worldwide, we can see some figures here. So it's saying core Jewish is about 15.2 million. And then it's saying it's 17.9 million if you include people who are have one Jewish parent. And then 20.9 million with the addition of the enlarged Jewish population. People who have no Jewish background, but they claim some sort of Judaism. So counting all those who are eligible for Israeli citizenship under Israel's law of return, in addition to Israeli Jews, raised the total to 23.7 million. So worldwide, there are about 23.7 million Jews. And we can see here that about half the Jews in the world live in the United States and 30% live in Israel. So 3 out of every 10 Jews in the world already live in Israel. So how many more Jews can they attract to Israel over the next 80 years or whatever, and will Jews still remain a majority? Now, if we look here at the Muslim population, it's been increasing steadily, just like the Jewish population. It's about 1.6 million right now. The Jewish population in Israel is about 6.6 million. But as we can see, in terms of percentages, the overall Muslim population is going up, and the Jewish population as a percentage has been going down. But it has remained steady at just under 75% for the last 8 years or so. It seems like they have stabilized the Jewish population at about 74%. If we look at this graph here, it's the total population of Israel from 2008 to 2021 by population group. Now, it has Jews and others lumped together as one, which is interesting. And then they have Arabs as its own separate group. So I'm not sure why they did this, but we can see here, if you just look at the graph, the dark blue is Jews and others. So they clearly outnumber Arabs by a pretty healthy margin. But let's take a look at the numbers here. So back in 2008, Arabs were about 1.5 million, Jews and others 6 million. And if we look at 2021, Jews and others is about 7.5 million, and Arabs is just under 2 million. So the Arab population increased by about a third, from 1.5 million to 2 million, whereas the Jews and others increased by about 25%, from 6 million to about 7.5 million. So in the last 13 years, we have the Arabs increasing by 33% and Jews and others increasing by 25%. So you can see how the Arab population is going up at a higher rate than Jews and others. And if you look at this graph, this shows the number of Jewish marriage ceremonies registered in Israel from 2009 to 2019. And we can see it's kind of gone up and down. It was about 37,000 in 2009. And then it went up to just under 40,000 in 2013, but it's been going down steadily for the last 4 or 5 years. 38,000, 35, 34, 33,000. And if we look at the number of Muslim marriages in the same time period, we can see a steady increase for most of the years. It was a smidgen under 10,000 in 2009, and in most years it's been going up. It went down in 2017, and then it just shot up again in 2018, and it went down slightly in 2019. So we're talking about 13,000 in 2019 compared to 10,000 in 2009. So we can see a steady increase in Muslim marriages in Israel. And for Jewish marriages, the trend has been going downwards. It's not as easy to see because there's been a lot of ups and downs. But in 2009 compared to 2019, in 2019 there was about 4,000 less. So guys, my conclusion is that for now at least, Jews will still remain a pretty big majority in Israel. But I can see how some Jews might be concerned that they may become a minority. If you look at this decrease in the overall percentage from almost 89% to 74%, so the percentage of Jews has gone down by about 15% since 1960. So I'm sure that the Jewish majority will be hoping that this will stay at least 74% and maybe even start going up again towards 80% or even higher. I don't think it's ever going to go up to like 88% again. And of course, Israel is surrounded by Arab nations, and there may be some immigration from those Arab countries into Israel. But Israel tries to get as many Jews to immigrate to Israel as they can, because that was the whole idea of Israel, to have a Jewish state. And going back to this paragraph here, they're allowing lots of migrants come from all over the world, basically. Africa, China, South America, some from Romania. And this is going to eat into the Jewish majority population. If they allow all these immigrants to continue coming from all these other countries and they're not Jewish, then we could see the Jewish majority shrink even further. And it won't be because of a further increase of Arabs. It'll be because of, Africans and South Americans and even Chinese people. I mean, it's already at over 200,000, which is maybe 2% or less of the overall population, but that number could increase further. So guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Will the Jewish majority shrink further in Israel? Or do you think they can hold it steady at about 74% or maybe even increase it? Let me know what you think about Israel in general and the Jewish state. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And be sure to hit the subscribe button. Check out my other videos. I got videos about population and a whole bunch of other subjects. So until next time, see you guys later. Thank you.